the display that we saw yesterday in Congress before the House Special Committee on the Weaponization of the federal government was deeply illiberal, in my opinion. And the illiberalism was emanating from the Democratic side, and it was being directed at two journalists, Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, who were there to discuss their reporting of the Twitter files, which we've discussed here extensively. We've had Matt Taibbi on. Great background for understanding what happened yesterday would be that interview. But Aaron, what was your reaction to what you witnessed yesterday?
That hearing was the culmination of years of Russiagate mania that normalized this culture inside, liberal democratic politics, where any critic of intelligence agencies, anybody who dissents from the party line, needs to be discredited and cannot be treated with any respect, and should be shunned, because all these Democrats, not one of them were willing to grapple with the content of the Twitter files, which show the extent to which U.S. intelligence agencies have been trying to censor online discussions and online information, and also trying to spread their own propaganda. That's what the Twitter files have revealed. And no Democrat on this committee was interested in that. Instead, they were trying to disparage the messengers, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger. And it was an amazing display. And they revealed such a McCarthyite way of looking at the world. And we have some clips that show this, but basically it came back again and again, that the fact that these journalists, Taibbi and Schellenberger, dared to question our holy national security state meant that they must be disparaged. And it was an incredible display.
Well, let's start with Michael Schellenberger's opening statement. I thought he laid out the thesis that he and Taibbi were presenting, which is that the intelligence agencies have, the federal government was weaponizing social media to advance its own objectives against both the left and the right, using these kind of cutouts like the Stanford Internet Observatory or the DFR lab at the Atlantic Council. Let's just take a look at this before we get into some of the attacks on Taibbi and Schellenberger.
I'd like to echo what Matt just said. I've never worked on an issue where so frequently while doing it, I just had chills go up my spine because of what I was seeing happening. I never thought in my own country that freedom of speech would be threatened in this way. And it's just frightening when you get into it. The most recent, our most recent discoveries, I think you understand the process, is that we first raised a bunch of concerns around the way Twitter pre-Elon Musk was censoring people and creating blacklists. Very quickly, we discovered that we had FBI agents basically and other government officials, demanding that Twitter take certain actions. We now know that the Department of Homeland Services, which has had, what's that? Security. Sorry, Department of Homeland Security, had to try to create a disinformation board. That went away after public backlash, but we now realize that they have this other enterprise, and they've been building out basically mechanisms to proliferate a censorship industrial complex around the country to censor on a whole range of issues. And so you've seen this censorship industry go from, well, we're just fighting ISIS, to, well, we're just fighting Russian disinformation bots, to, well, now we need to fight domestic misinformation, which is just saying we need to fight against people who are saying things we disagree with online. That's all that means. And I mean, it's not a slippery slope. It's an immediate leap into a terrifying mechanism that we only see in totalitarian societies, of attempting to gain control over what the social media platforms are allowing. And so, yeah, for me, it starts at DHS, but we basically see almost every government agency involved in this.
Yeah, it wasn't his opening statement, but it was, I think, a great dissemination of what Taibbi and Schellenberger were attempting to put forward, which is that the government is attempting to do an end around of the First Amendment. They start out by saying we need to fight ISIS propaganda. That was the justification for like the State Department Global Engagement Center. And in the end, it's just about silencing the speech of Americans on the grounds of misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, which we've always said here is just code for anything that interferes with the objectives of the national security state and the political establishment, which is really represented on that committee by the Democratic members. So let's start with I don't know which attack should we start with, Aaron? I mean, there's so
Well,
many.
let's start with the ranking Democrat, Plaskett. She, in her opening speech, it was unhinged. She accused Schellenberger and Taibbi of being a threat to people that oppose them.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not exaggerating when I say that you have called before you 2 witnesses who pose a direct threat to people who oppose them.
And what she's
does that
referring to
even
there is,
mean?
like, she said that right after she played a clip of Yoel Roth, who's that Twitter executive who was involved in coordinating with intelligence officials and all that. And Yoel Roth testified to Congress recently that as a result of the Twitter files, he had faced some threats. And so she's saying that that's the fault of Taibbi and Schellenberger. So for reporting on the contents of the Twitter files, they're now a direct threat to people who oppose them. But basically, as if they're sort of like architects of this effort to harm people who happen to cross them. It's such an unhinged claim. And what she was actually doing was threatening them and saying that because you're doing this reporting and because you're exposing censorship that we support as Democrats, you are a threat and we are going to smear you for it and discredit your reporting by accusing you of something really, really heinous. That's what she was doing.
And for those who don't know, Yoel Roth was the content manager for Twitter, who was in charge of and like digital safety and security. He was in charge of basically determining which intelligence cutouts could come in and decide who gets censored and what gets censored. He made the ultimate call, and he often knew that much of what they were pushing on Twitter, like the Hamilton 68 dashboard of Russian bots, was fake, but he failed to inform the public or even challenged them. And then he pulled some drama queen stuff where he like left his house under threat in order to kind of cast blame on those who were scrutinizing what he had done once all of the Twitter files came out. And like, we get threats all the time at the Grayzone. I'm not going to just leave my house and create some whole drama about it because of things people say to me online.
I'm not going to accuse somebody who like whatever calls me a bunch of names on Twitter. I'm not going to accuse them of like being a threat to my life. I mean, it's just like when you speak out, sometimes there are nasty people out there who are going to send you mean things. That's just a reality. And that's not the fault or the doing of journalists who report facts. It's such a ridiculous and cheap allegation to make. And then she goes on and has the gall to call them so-called journalists. And we have that clip as well. And it just speaks to the contempt and the immaturity of these people, that they can't grapple with the content of what is being discussed here, which is the national security state pressuring social media companies to both censor information they don't like and to spread their own propaganda. That's what this is about. And because Democrats right now have chosen to support that, here they all are calling 2 journalists who are reporting on this so-called journalists.
And to praise him for his work. This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing to buy Twitter. We know for a fact that foreign countries like Qatar, and to praise him for his.
That's another thing. This is so funny. So foreign countries like Saudi Arabia have always invested in Twitter. Like before Elon Musk bought Twitter, Saudi Arabia, or like a Saudi Arabian billionaire, I think was the second biggest stakeholder. You never heard Democrats complain about that before. After Musk bought Twitter, now she's raising concerns about foreign money in Twitter. And of course, she brings up Russian money in that thing because, of course, that must mean that Vladimir Putin is controlling Twitter as well. But yeah, she has the gall to call Taibbi and Schellenberger so-called journalists. And watch her reaction when Matt Taibbi really politely responds and tries to correct her. He obviously goes out of his way, I think, to be really respectful and to try to treat the hearing with respect. But watch her response. She can't even look at him as he's offering her a very polite correction. She can't even look at him as he's offering her a correction. Yeah.
Sorry, this is the wrong one. There are so many highlights or lowlights from Plaskett.
That time was spent at Rolling Stone magazine. Ranking Member Plaskett, I'm not a so-called journalist. I've won the National Magazine Award, the I.F. Stone Award for Independent Journalism, and I've written 10 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers. I'm now at that time was spent at Rolling.
What do you think she's whispering in the ears of her staff? It's like,
She's saying, I need to pretend like I'm not paying attention to him right now, so I'm just talking in your ear. So just nod your head. That's what she's saying.
that's exactly what's going on, because she's getting dressed down,
Yeah.
and it doesn't look very good for her.
Yeah. And then she goes and then she goes to her phone too. So she's got the ear, her aide's ear, and then she got her phone too, as if she's so busy and can't listen to Matt politely correct her and calling him a so-called journalist, and to list some of his accolades over his 30-year career as a journalist.
She represents the Virgin Islands, which is like, it's like a territory of the U.S. So it would be kind of unfair, but she's like a so-called member of Congress because she doesn't actually have a vote. She was laying out the contemptuous line for Taibbi and Schellenberger, and you don't have to win awards to be a journalist. But in her mind, you have to basically be a stenographer for the national security state and the hegemonic liberal power in Washington to be considered a journalist. These journalists are not accepted. They're pariahs. They're to be blacklisted. They were accused of being a threat. Like literally, their journalism was posited as a threat to the lives of people. And let's watch. This is Representative Dan Goldman, and the Democrats, they had to I don't feel like they were completely on message. And Dan Goldman rehashes a lot of old Russiagate talking points that you've blown out of the water, Aaron. I was just laughing when this
testimony here today that you disagree with the 2 indictments by Special Counsel Robert Mueller that definitively established that Russia interfered in our 2016 election through social media disinformation and a hack and leak operation?
No, I don't disagree.
Okay, Mr. Taibbi, do you disagree with those 2 indictments?
Well,
how do you disagree with an indictment?
Do you disagree? They're about 40 or 50 pages. Do you disagree with the evidence outlined in those indictments?
Well, indictments are just charges.
There weren't convictions.
Do you disagree with the evidence included in those indictments? Yes or no?
I'm not on the jury of that case. I couldn't possibly say yes or no.
Okay, because you said earlier, I believe, that you did not see Russia, you could not confirm that Russia interfered in our election in 2016, that you don't believe that. Is that your testimony here today? You don't believe that they did?
I think it's possible that they may have on a small scale, but certainly not to what's been reported.
What's been reported or what's been included in the indictments?
Well, again, indictments are allegations. They're not proof. And
I understand. So crazy. I mean, it's so crazy. Indictments are just allegations. And there was Robert Mueller concluded that there wasn't the big Trump-Russia collusion story, that it was kind of a hoax.
Pretty detailed allegation.
Aaron, you wanted to say something?
First of all, Dan Goldman is one of the wealthiest members of Congress. He's worth something like $250 million because he's the heir to the Levi Strauss fortune. And he also was a top lawyer for House Democrats when they impeached Trump after he briefly paused some weapon sales to Ukraine. At that impeachment hearing, that's when Adam Schiff said, we have to aid Ukraine and their people so that we can fight Russia over there. We don't have to fight Russia here. So that impeachment helped normalize in American liberals this need for us to sabotage peace in Ukraine and use Ukraine for a proxy war against Russia. And Dan Goldman, we can thank him for the mess we're in now, because that impeachment was about enforcing that consensus, the need to use Ukraine for a proxy war against Russia. And accordingly, because he is a diehard Cold Warrior, he is questioning Matt Taibbi and disparaging him for daring to not accept every claim in the holy Robert Mueller indictments. And what's funny about that is 2 things. First of all, as Matt points out, it's a claim in an indictment. It doesn't make it gospel just because it's there. I mean, unless you're a dictator, you're gonna accept the premise that indictments can be challenged. That's what lawyers do, right? So he's attacking Matt for daring to question that. And also, by his own logic, Robert Mueller doesn't even actually believe the claims in his indictments, because Robert Mueller dropped one of those indictments, the indictment of the Russian troll farm that he's attacking Matt Taibbi for questioning, Robert Mueller dropped that indictment because what happened?
Because they were going to get discovery in court because they
Yes.
actually showed up with a lawyer.
The troll farm got a lawyer in DC and they challenged it. And there were all these hearings, and the lawyer for the troll farm was showing what a joke this case was. It was an incoherent case that didn't even make any sense under US law. And of course, all this is about a troll farm that bought some ads on social media that weren't even about the election, except a tiny percentage, and that were just juvenile memes. And Daniel Goldman is livid that Matt Taibbi dares to question whether that amounted to interference in an election. And he's trying to nail him on that. And then when Matt Taibbi tries in that clip, in the exchange, to say to him, well, actually, Robert Mueller dropped that indictment, so what are you so mad at me about? He doesn't let him finish. He cuts him off and says, it's my time. So he won't even let Matt get out this answer that even Robert Mueller dropped that indictment that Daniel Goldman holds up as the holy word.
That's also what Debbie Wasserman Schultz did. And they don't want Taibbi to be able to say anything that will go into the congressional record.
Yes.
So they just constantly reclaim their time and don't let them answer. And let me just say that this, in the build up to the hearings that we're going to be seeing on the weaponization of the government, which are run by the chair's Jim Jordan. He's right-wing Republican, affiliated with the populist wing of the Republican Party. He has his own agenda. There's no denying that. But in the run-up to it, we were told that Jim Jordan and the Republicans on the committee would be the McCarthyites. But what we saw here in the questioning of two journalists was, it reminded me distinctly of the HUAC trials in the way that they were being questioned, because they're constantly trying to set them up as Russian puppets, as Kremlin simps, as people who are being covertly paid, or they were controlled somehow by Elon Musk because he has the ultimate say over releasing the Twitter files. He's the owner of Twitter. They were treated in a McCarthyite, straightforward McCarthyite fashion. I wanted to actually move on to Colin Allred, who's another Democrat on the committee, and just to demonstrate another line of attack, McCarthyite attack, which we constantly get accused of here at the Grayzone, which was to call them conspiracy theorists.
And I hope that you can actually take this with you, because I honestly hope that you will grapple with this, that it may be possible.
He's talking kind of like the dad at the end of Family Matters, when he imparts the wisdom to the children. He's clearly studied this.
He's emotional. He's
hat,
emotional about this.
Well, let's get that again.
That if we can take off the tinfoil hat, that there's not a vast conspiracy, but that ordinary folks and national security agencies responsible for our security are trying their best to find a way to make sure that our online discourse doesn't get people hurt or see our democracy undermined. And that the very rights that you think they're trying to undermine, they may be trying to protect.
I love the idea of ordinary folks, like, I don't know, like the local milkman, like joining up with like a CIA agent to like censor journalists they don't like on Twitter. Like ordinary folks.
Nina Jankowicz is just a working class Broadway gal who's trying to do the best she can to protect us from the hate mongers. He had kind of an Obama quality too. Like,
oh yeah,
there's folks out there. The folks out there trying to protect us from hatred, and disinformation, and misinformation, and malinformation. Look, let me be clear. When
ordinary folks.
Well, he brought up. He brought up a swastika and a Jewish star as his exhibit, to kind of suggest that Taibbi and Schellenberger and the Republicans on the committee favor that as being the protected speech, that's what they're actually defending. And Taibbi did make a good point that, in a free society that has a First Amendment, you actually have to defend people's right to be awful in public. Displaying a swastika in the United States is not illegal, as far as I know, under the Constitution. So he was coming at it as the ACLU liberal that he presented himself as in his opening statement, and the Democrats were not. But that's not what's being discussed here in terms of the content being censored. What's being censored, as Taibbi pointed out, is like the account of Telesur English, which is one of the best broadcast organizations in the world. It's a Latin American broadcast organization that is socialist oriented, based in Caracas, Venezuela. And so when the Trump administration attempted its corporate coup against Venezuela, they started seeing their accounts nuked, and Taibbi was there to defend them as well. That was just a political decision, and they weren't pumping out any hate.
And we should play that clip where Matt says that, because it speaks to all the people who've accused Matt of pushing this narrative that like it's only right-wing voices that are being silenced. He actually explicitly contradicted that. But going back to briefly to what Allred said, Congressmember Colin Allred, about how we have to take off the tinfoil hat and consider that actually not everything is a conspiracy, and that our national security agencies are just trying to reduce harm and protect our democracy. Well, who's put on the tinfoil hat? It's people like him and other Democrats who have parroted the conspiracy theories that have come from national security agencies, that Trump was a Russian asset, that Trump was being blackmailed by Vladimir Putin, that Russia was paying bounties on US troops in Afghanistan, that Russia was zapping people with microwave weapons, that Russia was responsible for Hunter Biden's laptop. All of those are tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. And where do they come from? They come from the national security agencies, who he claims are trying to protect people. And when people dare question those tinfoil hat conspiracy theories, they get censored. And for challenging that censorship, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberg get a lecture from this guy where he's almost crying. That's what happened there.
Do you remember when CNN reported that Putin handed Trump a soccer ball at the Helsinki summit containing a surveillance device? Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the kind of media coverage we've been treated to by those that Colin Allred considers legitimate for years.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, Taibbi was attacked also by the left. The left, meaning those sectors of the professional activists world in New York and on the coasts that fancies themselves to be more radical than the Democrats. They've showed either a studied disinterest in the Twitter files, or they've just straight up attacked Taibbi and said, oh, he's a tool of the right wing because he's appearing as a guest before the Republicans, and that the richest man in the world gave him all of these leaks. And so he's a tool of the richest man in the world. And they don't really understand how this works. But I mean, this is very instructive in countering that narrative, is just to listen to Taibbi's own words. And it was so meaningful when he said this, because we've been reporting this at the Grayzone for years about the coordinated censorship of accounts of real people in Latin American countries that are under attack by US empire, like Nicaragua, Venezuela, or the removal by PayPal of Consortium News' ability to receive funds, the theft of their funds. They did that to Mint Press as well. And Taibbi speaks to this.
Again, Ranking Member Plaskett, I would note that the evidence of Twitter-government relationship includes lists of tens of thousands of names on both the left and right. The people affected include Trump supporters, but also left-leaning sites like Consortium and Truth Out, the leftist South American channel Telesur, the Yellow Vest movement. That, in fact, is a key point of the Twitter files, that it's neither a left nor right issue.
Yeah, exactly.
But the people, but the people
definitely the right is, but well, let me just say, definitely the right has been disproportionately censored and attacked under the old regime of Yoel Roth and company. That's a fact. I mean, no one can say that conservative accounts were not disproportionately attacked by that Twitter regime.
Look at the Hunter Biden laptop story. This is a major story about the Democratic presidential candidate that was censored. People were not allowed to share the story in the New York Post by Facebook and Twitter. That's censorship. There's nothing comparable that's ever happened to a Democrat. So yes, it's true that it's not wrong to say that right-wing voices are being silenced. The point is that Matt's not just saying that right-wing voices have been silenced. He points out some examples: Consortium News, Telesur, and Truth Out. The problem is, so many of these self-described leftists who are attacking Matt Taibbi, they don't care about the censorship of sites like Consortium News, because Consortium News actually challenges the national security state. And the self-described leftists who attack Matt Taibbi don't. And so they don't care that Consortium News is getting censored, because they don't see Consortium News as one of them, because their club caters to the Democratic Party narrative, and Consortium News doesn't. So they don't care about a leftist site like that being attacked.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, they're just Democrats who want a better Democratic Party and fall for every ploy by the Democrats to keep sheepdogging them into the party ranks. But that's why they use so much radical rhetoric, and they cosplay as radicals so hard, is to cover up the objective reality of their political behavior. The material reality of the US left is essentially the street wing of the Democratic Party. And to a certain extent, the World Economic Forum, the pandemic really showed that. There was some really just true comedy that took place. I love this exchange between Representative Sylvia Garcia and Taibbi. I'm not going to be able to do justice to it here, but Sylvia Garcia actually tweeted out one of the most embarrassing exchanges of the day. And it's worth reading it. She said, "To hide their inability to legislate, Republicans have launched a dangerous political circus. That sole purpose," I think she means whose sole purpose, "is to inject extremist politics into our justice system. I will continue to fight extreme MAGA Republican lies, misinformation, and outright conspiracy theories." So she thought this was going to be like, her boss lady moment, and she'll be fundraising off of this. But if you look at that tweet, she's getting completely ratioed. And here's what she said and what she did, which I found totally unethical.
When was the first time that Mr. Musk approached you about writing the Twitter files?
Again, Congresswoman, that would...
I just need a date, sir.
But I can't give it to you, unfortunately.
This has her own logo on it, and she's trying to demand that a journalist present his sources and methods.
Fortunately, because this is a question of sourcing, and I don't give up. I'm a journalist. I don't reveal my sources.
It's a question of chronology.
No, that's a question of
Because you
sourcing.
earlier said that someone had sent you through the internet some message about whether or not you would be interested in some information.
Yes, and I refer to that person as a source.
So you're not going to tell us when Musk first approached you?
Again, Congressman, you're asking me to, you're asking a journalist to reveal a source.
So then you consider Mr. Musk to be the direct source of all this?
No, now you're trying to get me to say that he is the source. I just can't answer your question.
He isn't. If you're telling me you can't.
And Dan Goldman, the lawyer, is next to her saying, why can't you answer the question? No journalist is going to reveal their source to a member of Congress.
Answer because it's your source. Well, then the only logical conclusion is that he is in fact your source.
Well, you're free to conclude that.
Well, sir,
So that's disgusting. I mean, from the point of view of journalistic ethics, he's being demanded to violate them, and then she's posting it online as some giant own. Remember, Trump was always presented as like the greatest threat to media ever. Garcia goes on to demand to know why Taibbi didn't hand over the latest Twitter files to the House Democrats on the committee, and why she didn't realize that he had published them on Twitter, because she was asking, what conditions did you have with Elon Musk? And he said, the only condition was that we published this on Twitter. And she said, so you gave the files to Twitter? And she kept saying, you gave the files to Twitter first instead of to us, because she doesn't understand that Twitter is a place where you publish. She doesn't even understand how Twitter works. And yet she's asking all these hostile and aggressive questions. And then this was one of the greatest moments of the day.
Yet you yourself posted on your I guess it's kind of like a web page. I don't quite understand what Substack is, but posted on your I guess it's kind of like a web page. I don't quite understand what Substack is, but that what I can say is that yet.
So she doesn't know what Substack is. And then she goes on to enter into a really bizarre line of questioning. And I don't know if this was even intentional or not, but she conjures up a really kind of like an image that I would never want to think about.
In your discussion, in your answer, you also said that you were invited by a friend, Barry Weiss.
My friend Barry Weiss.
So this friend works for Twitter, or what is her,
She's a journalist.
She's pretty well known.
Sir, I didn't ask you a question. I'm now asking Mr. Schellenberger a question. Please
Yes,
do
ma'am.
not
Barry Weiss is
interrupt.
a journalist.
I'm sorry, sir?
She's a journalist.
She's a journalist. So you work in concert with her?
Yeah.
Do you know when she first was contacted by Mr. Musk?
I don't know.
You don't know. So you're in this as a threesome?
There was many more people involved in that.
There was
What?
Yeah.
contact with Mr. Musk.
I don't know.
You don't know. So you're in this as a threesome?
Like, why did she say that? What did she think she was accomplishing there?
I don't know. But, going back to what she said about the source of the information.
I just don't want to think about Barry Weiss in a threesome. And Elon Musk and anybody. I just don't. But I wonder if she was deliberately trying to conjure that image up to kind of disgust people. You have to be really stupid to say that and not have it be intentional.
But what she was saying about, trying to get to Matt's source, like what she's trying to avoid is the source of the information we're all receiving, which is the files themselves, which she doesn't want to talk about. So she wants to make this about Elon Musk, just like the other Democratic speaker wanted to make this about the money behind Twitter now, like Russia, including Russia, according to their speculation. Like nothing about the content of the actual files themselves.
Right.
That's ultimately what the source of the information is, and that's what they don't want to discuss.
So what about the content of the files? What do you think they're trying to cover up? I mean,
we've learned so much already on all these key issues where there was a narrative to enforce. The national security state was deployed to work with Twitter to enforce it and to censor countervailing voices. And that includes Russiagate, where, and we talked about this with Matt when he came on with us, that like Mark Warner was furious at Twitter because they refused to validate Mark Warner's conspiracy theories that Russian bots were brainwashing Americans. So Mark Warner was pressuring Twitter to come up with something that could validate his claims of a massive Russian social media operation. And we learned that more about, and again, the Grayzone covered this back when it was happening, but this Hamilton 68 dashboard tracking so-called Russian accounts and Russian bots was a fraud. Because as a Twitter file showed, they had the people behind Hamilton 68, which is a group of neocons at one of their think tanks, the Alliance for Security and Democracy, had no evidence to share. And we learned that Adam Schiff tried to get Paul Sperry, who's a journalist who's done a lot of work exposing Russiagate. Schiff tried to have him censored. And we learned stuff about COVID too. There was recently something shared by Matt in a thread about how basically there was a discussion among some officials of trying to censor
true content,
right? About the impacts of vaccines. Like they acknowledged it was true, but they didn't want it to be spread because they thought that would fuel vaccine hesitancy. And the idea there is that the people,
stories of true vaccine side effects need to be nuked.
Yeah. And
isn't that public health? Like, shouldn't people be warned about this?
But the thinking behind that is the people out there don't have the intellectual prowess that we have to decide for themselves what's good for them or not. So we have to decide for them what information they can and cannot see. That's what they're basically saying, that they can't see true information because they don't have the capacity to make decisions for themselves. That's the underlying attitude towards these people, which is so revealing about how our people in power view the common population.
In many ways, I mean, these are Democrats, big government Democrats, you would presume, who are behind this. It's kind of a libertarian attitude to remove alerts about consumer products and the health impact they might have on you. Every big pharma product is required to disclose side effects in their commercials at rapid speed because they're so extensive. But for some reason, the mRNA injection was protected from that. And, we can just go down. This is Taibbi before he testified, or on the day he testified, laying out the basis for he and Schellenberger's term, the Censorship Industrial Complex. And you have, calls to monitor all of Trump's tweets, then regular meetings between Twitter executives and FBI and Department of Homeland Security to develop a formal system for receiving thousands of content reports from every agency in government, telling them what to censor, what to amplify, emails from the FBI and DHS, providing spreadsheets with hundreds of thousands of account names to review and potentially censor. This includes former Chicago Sun-Times reporter and the site Truth Out, which publishes Noam Chomsky. I don't even think Truth Out is, that radical of a site, to be honest, or that it necessarily challenges the national security state in a way that like Consortium News does. Anti-Ukraine narratives were flagged for moderation. And then all of these kinds of disinformation specialists like would come in. Were being reviewed, as you can see here, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, the Atlantic Council's DFR lab, and the National Endowment for Democracy, the regime change wing of the U.S. government. These were all basically approved by Yoel Roth, who came up with a spreadsheet where he also wrote off certain other organizations like RAND Corp. He said they're serious, but they're too close to the Department of Defense, so we don't want to be seen as having DOD moderation, which is interesting. Too chummy. It goes on, but this is, and then the Aspen Institute, we talked about this before. The Aspen Institute, which gets funding from the State Department and USAID, held this star-studded confab in August 2021 to release its final report on information disorder. And this is where the Aspen Institute is also where journalists were actually coached on how to respond to the Hunter Biden laptop story and to how to actually help U.S. intelligence and the feds push this story, sweep this story under the rug as election time approached, and to frame it all as a kind of Russian disinformation operation. So the Aspen Institute's key, but these files are so important for anyone who doesn't want the national security state to control what we see and hear, to control our digital commons, and to erase any of us who dissent against them or a government or a psyop that's being foisted on us and deny us due process. And this goes well beyond Twitter. This isn't just about Twitter. This is about PayPal. It's about our friend Wyatt Reed having his PayPal account and his Venmo account removed without any due process. A journalist, Mint Press and Consortium News had the same thing happen to him. And I pointed out yesterday, this also pertains to YouTube, where we're speaking to you right now, which is owned by a military contractor, Google. Our live stream on Paul Mason presenting emails exposing him as a national security state collaborator was removed by YouTube without explanation. The due process was that I protested the removal. They put it back online and apologized to me, and then they removed it again without any explanation. And you know who's behind that. You know what that's about. You know who's protecting him. And you know who's denying us the right to present true facts about someone who is operating as a journalist, trying to run for parliament and informing the public about what he's actually doing. That's the censorship industrial complex. That's what the Democrats were trying to silence. That, and they were attacking the messenger, attacking journalists in McCarthyite fashion. It really kind of like made me think my next book should be about the Democrats and what they've become. Because this, as bad as the Democrats may have been, they've always been, an imperial party. They had a wing of the party that was civil libertarian, that was truly liberal, and that also stood up against the national security state at certain times during Iran-Contra, BCCI, even during the first Gulf War and during the Iraq War. The speeches of Senator Teddy Kennedy about Abu Ghraib were seminal. That part of the Democratic Party is completely gone.
It's done.
The
It's
party
totally
of censorship.
And it's replaced by people like the Squad, who just virtue signal. And when it comes down to all these important issues fall into line, with the exception we have to acknowledge and give them credit for this week on the Syria vote, which we're going to get to. They did vote for a U.S. troop withdrawal, but in so many other issues, they're in lockstep with the national security state, and also they're not taking the lead in challenging the national security state. So, for example, even the Syria vote, that wasn't the initiative of Republicans. It wasn't progressives trying to do that. And by the way, the one time they have taken the initiative, when they called for diplomacy with Russia late last year, they retracted that after 24 hours. So in the rare moments where they do actually try to emulate the Democrats or some of the Democrats of old, they cave within 24 hours under neocon pressure. That is where we're at today. And before we get to our last segment about Syria, let me take a minute to ask everybody who's watching who hasn't yet to like the stream.
Yeah.
That apparently helps us reach more people. And it's great to see so many people tuned in. And
this is
please
awesome.
give us a like.
This is awesome. They put the GZs in the chat.